This is part 2 of episode 2 of the In Search of Sovereignty podcast, Quantum Health with Carly Rose. If you haven't heard part 1, please check it out. It's called Quantum Health with Carly Rose, part 1. Enjoy.
That's why I love diving into the frequency conversation, because I'm super into like herbalism and starting to dive into homeopathy with all the things, but like learning about so I first started to use frequency when I was 19 years old at this place in Chicago, and frequency devices have been around for a very long time. And even if you get back to like the ancestral, like the structures of pyramids and using certain materials like copper, using frequency with gardening and planting for higher yields, like this has been around for a very long time. It's like just intelligence, historical intelligence. And so knowing that our body is mostly water and electrical, it just makes sense that with frequency, we will have such a big impactful change. Mm-hmm. And so that's why grounding or the sun, or even using frequency devices to administer frequency to your body, it has a huge effect. And Dr. Catherine is amazing at explaining just how frequency has this effect on like the easy water and the mitochondria in our body, and also just the nervous system response, hormone response, trauma response. I mean, it's just all absolutely so connected. And so, yeah, I think that the history, so basically, I love this woman. Her name is Dr. Carolyn McMacken, and I get to meet her next week, and I'm geeking out because I'm like one of her biggest fans. I swear. Nice. I don't like idolize people, but I idolize her. I'm like, you're great. But she was a pharmaceutical rep in her 20s. And this was, I don't know how old she is now. She might be like in her 60s or 70s. But she was a pharmaceutical rep when they took away herbalism and homeopathy and frequency out of the medical system. Yeah. And so she started to study with certain practitioners of how, and basically, if you continue to do any of those things, they would take away your license as a doctor. So people really didn't have that much of a choice. And so, and she talks about this all in her book and podcast and the book's called The Resonance Effect. I can link the podcast in your show notes on my list as well. Yeah. You will freak out. I mean, just based on what you already know, you will absolutely love it. And so what her experience is, she would just basically have a patient that was in a lot of pain, let's say for their knee, or was experiencing any type of illness. So she would give them a frequency. Okay, no, that one wouldn't work. Okay, give them another frequency. Nope, that one wouldn't work. Give them another one. Tune it up a little bit. That one worked. That one got them out of pain, or that one helped support them with this health issue or this health issue or this health issue. And so she navigated how all these specific currents can really have a direct impact on our body. Again, we're electrical, we're water. So it literally just makes sense. And it makes sense because it is so effective why it was taken out, because it's really, I mean, it's profitable to a certain extent. Like there's frequency devices, of course, I work for a frequency device company. So it is profitable to a certain extent, but not as profitable as everything else. Yeah. So yeah. And it's really cool because I kind of view it as tuning up a guitar. Like you tune up the strings and then you're in perfect harmony. And then sometimes you got to tune it up again, like our bodies. And what I'm noticing is that the people I work with that are using frequency, like let's say they had like fibromyalgia all their life and they're using frequency. Well, they're not having that problem on a day-to-day basis anymore. They're experiencing more time. And then all of a sudden they feel like they don't even need to use it, because it's literally using your body's own intelligence and changing it. And it's not like this dogmatic approach where we think we need to take turmeric every single day to be healthy for the rest of our lives. That's the only way we'll be healthy, because that was totally me. So it's very different now to look at things in terms of the quantum and frequency and be like, oh, like your body can get to this terrain, I guess, for lack of a better word, that can literally heal itself. Yeah. And so it's all about being in that environment to do so.
Right. Well, that's like the literal terrain theory versus germ theory, like it's like that was probably around the same time that a lot of the frequency stuff was happening. There were multiple different disruptions happening in the health and medical space right around the same time. One of the biggest things that was going on was the whole like Louis Pasteur versus, I can't remember the other guy's name at the moment. someone will know, and I'll put it in the show notes if I remember, but it was like basically
Yeah.
these two guys that were sort of competing, against each other for the advocation of germ theory versus terrain theory. And Louis Pasteur was a big proponent of germ theory, right? Which is like where pasteurization comes from, because the idea was like there is us and then there are germs, and you are a clean, sterile unit that cannot be contaminated with germs, or otherwise you'll get sick. And if you introduce germs into your system, then it'll give you, bacterial infections and viruses and all kinds of stuff. Therefore, we need to sterilize everything. We need to pasteurize eggs. We need to pasteurize milk. We need to do, clean all the things basically all the time, in order to prevent people from getting sick. That was kind of like the prevailing
Yeah.
theory, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Just thinking about like
Yeah. Nuts.
thousands and thousands of years of human history up until this point where like we didn't boil milk, which is crazy. That's like kind of goes back to the raw milk conversation at the very beginning. But then there was this
Yeah.
this other guy whose name I can't remember, of course, who was a proponent of terrain theory, which is this idea that every person has a different immune system and a different, bodily kind of ecosystem going on. We all have our own gut microbiomes and our own, like little, like I said, ecosystem of different types of microbes and fungi and viruses and things. And the better you take care of yourself with providing yourself with the nutrients and plenty of sunlight and sleep and all the things that we know are good for us, and nutrition
Yeah.
in the form of like nutrient dense foods and things, and taking care of your body, the more that you're doing that, the better and more equipped
Yeah.
your terrain is to handle,
Mm, yes.
exposures to things like viruses and bacteria and stuff. And there's
Hmm.
actually a really, really interesting subset of the terrain theory people that don't believe that viruses exist in a
Hmm.
separate form. Which, I haven't done enough research on that to have an opinion on it. I'm just stating in case people
Same
are
here, but
interested
I'm
in
familiar.
looking into that.
Definitely. Yeah.
But it's really, it makes sense to me, because I feel like, like take for example, not everybody got it. And for some people who did get it, there were people in the same households that didn't catch it, right? So like what's the explanation for that other than the fact that
Mm,
one person's body was better prepared to handle exposure to it versus the other
mm,
person's body? And whatever
yeah.
that means, that might be that they have some sort of comorbidity or some other underlying condition, or it could be
Mm,
because they're out of tune. For example, their bodies are literally like not resonating correctly, or whatever it is. But it's, so that was one thing that was going on in the
mm.
medical industry at that time, is the germ theory versus terrain theory. And sort of predictably, germ theory won out, because it's, as you might imagine, it's much more profitable for them to sell
Yeah.
you things like
Very clear.
pasteurized milk. Then, I mean, like,
Yeah.
also think about it from a logistics standpoint too. It's you literally could not have a national level milk, producer, for example, because by the time raw milk lasts for like a week, if you want to drink it before it starts to go sour. And then obviously once it goes sour, you can use it for all kinds of other things. It doesn't really go bad in that sense.
Right.
Um, but that's not profitable. You can't sell that unless you're just selling it on a local level. So for big dairy producers that wanted to sell milk
Yeah.
nationally, they've got to
Yeah.
figure out a way to preserve it, right? So they boil it
Right.
and they homogenize it, which, like, also that's another thing that Sally Fallon talks about in Nourishing Traditions, which is how the process of homogenization just like destroys the fat particles and also denatures the proteins as well. So it basically makes
Right.
pasteurized milk like a dead liquid. You're just drinking like a
Right.
white liquid, basically.
For
But
sure.
anyway, that was going on.
Wild.
And then also the whole frequency thing that you kind of touched on, which was that I was reading into this a little bit, and I have that book on my list of books to read. But
Yeah.
this whole idea of using frequency for healing, and also that the fact that herbalism was so much more prominent back in like the early 1900s, before the oil industry boomed. And people like the Rockefellers decided that it was more profitable to use, what happened was that they were like, we have all this oil and we have a certain amount of it that we can use when we refine it for things like creating gasoline and other, applications of oil like propane and natural gas and stuff like that. We have all these other oil byproducts. What do we do with them? We want to be able to sell those as well, right? And so they were like, what can we create out of oil byproducts? And that's things like polyester, so artificial fabrics, and things like pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah.
And so they basically they created a whole new industry based off of oil that became extremely profitable for them. And
Hmm.
I don't remember what the source was of this that I was reading about, how that's right around that time is when, which it sounds like, I can't remember what did you say her name was, the doctor that you're about to meet?
Dr. Carolyn McMacken.
Dr. Carolyn McMacken, that she was probably around during this time period where they were literally switching out textbooks
Yeah.
that used to have like herbalism solutions in them and
Crazy.
replacing them with things like pharmaceutical drugs that are based off
Yeah.
of oil byproducts.
Yeah, and then the information just gets lost, like, with I mean, it's just how any other culture, like, loses its
Like its
just losing
identity.
its yeah, its
Yeah.
identity. I mean, really, it's just diluted and lost, and
It's
then especially,
pasteurized.
like, this it's literally
It's
pasteurized,
literally
and it's like
pasteurized.
this information is, like, intentionally hidden too. It's, like, not only just that, like, that it's lost, but it's actually like, there's a distraction, it's
Right.
intentionally hidden. So, yeah, you went into the depths there, got really juicy because,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's just, like, the actual truth. And, I think that, again, when people are presented with this information that's not necessarily taught, then, it becomes very understandable. And you can see things more from a bird's eye view versus just like what has been conditioned to us in the
Right.
school system. And yeah, it's very interesting how like our world views like the most prestigious schools, like the most intelligent people, and it's like above everyone else. But I think that through that, like a lot of the academics, academia in general, is very twisted and like distorted intentionally. And so, yeah, it's just a good reminder for everyone to kind of ground back down and like don't lose that intuition of logic, because really you can get very lost fast. And getting back to nature, getting back to your body, and will automatically just bring you back to a sense of truth. And I think everything becomes a lot more clear.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, ground yourself literally with your feet on the
Yeah.
ground, and also ground yourself with your thoughts and your investigation of everything, honestly, because I
Yeah.
mean, it really is. I mean, for that, all the stuff that I just mentioned, it's just following the money, it's following who's making the most money off of things and why they would continue to prop up certain systems in order to continue
Hmm.
to profit off of you, and it's like, to the average person that you're telling this kind of stuff to, and you like, they have no frame of reference for understanding, why they might want to investigate herbalism versus pharmaceuticals, for example, right? But then you explain to them where pharmaceuticals came from and what the precursor was. And that's not to say that, like, I'm not demonizing allopathic medicine entirely in any sense, right? I,
Right.
I think that Erica and I were talking about this yesterday, that I think
Hmm.
that um there are definite uses for allopathic medicine. And, like we were
Absolutely.
talking about the example of like acute cases of like broken bones and things like that. Like it's like
Hmm.
you need a doctor that can help you fix your bones. All right. But like,
Absolutely.
for things like, the flu, or for, a cold, or for headaches, or for, or like cold sores or whatever, like there's a lot of things that you can do yourself at home with herbalism, which is honestly, like, if you go back like 150 years from now, that's what the doctor would have prescribed you. Um,
Right.
and people listening would be like, well, like, we've like made progress since then, and we don't live 150 years ago, and so we have all of these like like new medicine and things like that. But like, you have to ask yourself what the net gain is and what the pros and cons are, right? With herbalism,
Mm.
um, it is, I like to think of it in terms of like, plants are packaged with the exact right ratios of what you need
Totally.
in the ratios in which they appear naturally in nature. And so like, like for example, we were talking about vitamin D earlier. Vitamin D requires magnesium to synthesize, but magnesium requires vitamin A in order to be able to be like active, right?
Hmm.
And so if you're eating liver, you're getting vitamin D and vitamin A in the exact right ratios to be able to support
Right.
that process, right? But if you're taking a vitamin D supplement and a vitamin A supplement, you have to be really careful that you're making sure not to exceed those ratios in a weird way to create an imbalance of one or the other and get vitamin A toxicity, for example. It's the same thing with herbs, that they appear in the exact ratios that they need to be in, for them to be maximally effective and bioactive for what you need them for, right? Versus pharmaceuticals, that a
Right.
lot of them are taking the same compounds that are present in herbs, but concentrating them at a crazy degree, um, without all of the, sort of supportive compounds that come packaged in the herb to begin with, that can cause a degree of toxicity in your body if you are overusing a specific type of drug, right? So it's sort of like,
Mhm,
what are
mhm.
the pros and cons there? And
Yeah.
yes, modern medicine has made a ton of strides, but also like, let's not forget where we came from, and not forgetting things like frequency healing, and things like herbalism, considering that that's what the modern medicine industry was based off of to begin with,
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and let's not forget the percentage of medical error either.
You're right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
Humans.
all the facts. Like we need all the facts. We don't just need one side of it. We need everything, and then everyone can make a discerned decision.
Right.
So,
Make it.
I'm a big proponent of that. Like not making it very black and white, but it's like no, let's be inclusive to all of the information, and then
Right.
people can use their intuition versus like coercion and like guilt and all these things.
Right. Right. You can't have informed consent without the informed part.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just consent and you don't really know what you're
Yeah.
consenting to, right? So,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
manipulation. Yeah.
that's just manipulation, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I
Yeah.
think that the focusing on the quantum health piece of that, I feel like, that it can really change your frame of reference to look at all the different ways that modern conditions are sort of disrupting our hormones, and we touched on a couple of those things about like birth control
Yeah.
and non-native EMFs, and food and nutrition and things like that. But what would you say is kind of like one of the biggest areas of concern that you see that you would probably tell people to be really mindful of as an area of where they might consider starting with their quantum health
Yeah.
journey?
Yeah, I kind of what I said was that I used to come from a really deep place of fear about these things. And it's so interesting because I know we're talking about a lot of like, very like some people can do as dark things in this
Sure.
podcast, but it used to have a very like very physical effect on me. And now that I understand quantum health, it's like I can talk about these things without being triggered and like because I know the bigger picture of how
Right.
I can protect myself. So for example, I used to like walk down the street and be like, oh my gosh, a 5G tower. Oh my gosh, that person, I could smell their laundry detergent outside. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like, they're using glyphosate on their lawn. And now I feel like I'm so like grounded and balanced that none of those things affect me because I understand like that, like how we can shift our health using our mind and the quantum, but also, and like how we can protect ourselves physically. And again, add in these tools that further support us. But also just like the frequency of love and the frequency of happiness is really like once I kind of realized that it's all of these things are taking away from that, it like became very easy for me to comprehend. Oh, it's like that if that is really the end all be all, like the frequency of love and the frequency of happiness and all these other things are a distraction. It doesn't make sense for me to be in that vibration of those things. Like I think that a lot of those are intentionally placed
Hmm.
and that it's like a connection to something more to bring us back. And so that being said, like making decisions out of fear, is very challenging. So I wouldn't recommend like anyone making decisions out of fear. But
Yeah.
just when you learn about these things, I also understand how they do have a physical impact on you, and you really have to be grounded to persevere, essentially.
Right.
And so, just like, I mean, how about this? How about a free tip? Why don't you everyone go home and they just put like a little tape over their light switch at home, and instead of using artificial light, just switch to candles. Like
Yeah.
save on your electric bill, invest in beeswax candles. And if you want to like buy some things, consider, I mean, my water filter is very expensive that I have because it filters like all contaminants in every single source in my house. So like even the hose in the toilet, I filtered water. And
Nice.
that was, it's great and I love it, but not everyone has that accessibility. So maybe
Right.
just like get a big canteen and like if you have a whole like a local I don't want to say Whole Foods because like support of co-ops and stuff, but if you have a local health food store that has like a filtered water space, like bring in that and just start where you can. And it's not about making these huge strides, like
Right.
moving the needle just a little bit. And before you know it, you're in this like totally different space. But yeah, for anyone listening, like the most accessible thing to do is literally just put a piece of tape over your light switch so you're not tempted to turn on artificial light or blue light. And also get like red light films to go over, like in my fridge we have like red tape to go over the blue light. in there, and it turns the fridge red.
Nice. That's a
And
good idea.
yeah, there's like film people can get for that too. And then maybe also just getting, things for your laptop or your phone. A lot of those softwares, like I have my Red on right now, it's completely free. It's a setting in your iPhone. So just start where these things are accessible if that's a thing for you. If you've got more of a budget, there's a bunch of different devices to invest in, like a water filter or a frequency device or like a sauna. There's so many different things to do, but it really just depends on someone's situation.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that start small. You can get a shower water filter for like $40, on Amazon if you have the budget for that. That'll filter out like most of the contaminants that you're going to be worried about, and also remineralizes the water.
Mhm.
There are definitely ways to start incrementally and inexpensively kind of replacing things that are probably problematic. So
Yeah.
and also investing in things like, like you said, red lights and beeswax candles, or like maybe making your own beeswax candles, which is a fun activity
Yeah.
for the family. That's always a good thing to do. I had a couple more specific questions that I wanted to ask before we wrap things up here, because
Yeah.
we're coming up probably about an hour at this point. So, we had talked a little bit, touched on the emotional imbalances and trauma and things like that. And so I wanted to ask, specifically, like how are our emotions and past traumas causing imbalances in our bodies and, with our hormones and things like that, and how can we use the principles of quantum physics and frequency to rebalance ourselves.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So that is such a loaded question. I think that to start, I guess I'll just story tell like maybe one of my experiences and how I really have seen it played out. And maybe people can like put in their journey and kind of see how it plays out. But essentially, so when I was younger, I was like a really overweight kid, always called fat. I dressed like a boy for so long, like just wanted to be one of the guys. Then that developed to me having these beliefs about myself, having eating disorders, self-punishing, then from there going into an abusive relationship and furthering self-punishment because of these beliefs that I've had from when I was a child, that I'm not worthy, I'm not this, all these things. And then when I started diving in, when I got out of the relationship, started to dive into quantum health and frequency and realize that like that initial trauma led me to experiencing all these other things, when in reality I just needed to go back to that inner child and do the work of those thought patterns surrounding that circumstance. So that's a very general and short like story timeline there, but it's interesting. Like all when people talk about inner child work, it's like you really just do have to do inner child work of your upbringing. If someone had like a tough upbringing, like repatterning those thoughts, and they call it, oh, I can't think of the word. I have an EMDR therapist, and basically that's rapid eye movement. For anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's like you either like look at this ball on a screen moving, and it actually unlocks different parts of your brain to bring trauma to the forefront, so you can process it and move it out of your body. And that's working on such a frequency level too. It's actually wild, all the different waves your body will go through, and that trauma will leave, and you'll actually feel this upgrade, as we say, for lack of a better word. Like it really is that. And so um yeah, I mean, just when trauma happens, especially, your body doesn't necessarily know that you're out of it. Like let's say you are out of an abusive relationship, or you are out of a dangerous circumstance. When you go back and think about it, your body, if you close your eyes and think about it, like you can still feel like you're there and feel the emotions, and your body will flood itself with those hormones,
Right.
and those components, bringing you further back to that state. And so it's so important to like, follow. That's why I brought up that exercise earlier of that teacher I had that had us write down all of our thoughts, to really hold ourselves accountable and have that mirror that we can look at and clearly see where we're at mentally. And Dr. Catherine Clinton, she talked about how, structured water and grounding and our bodies being electric, how that can actually support us as we go through trauma. And she actually talked about like a fascia. If you remember, she talked about the fascia trauma
Hmm.
relationship of how trauma is stored in our fascia, and it can be really triggered physically and still stored in our body. Just how like, parasites can hold memory in our body. And when you get rid of the parasites, it can come with all sorts of emotions and things
Right.
leaving your body. Because if it was in your body for 10 plus years, that thing was with you through a lot of memories that are
Yeah,
stored
yeah,
in your cells.
right.
So, it's really interesting how, like, when again, personally, when I've dove into quantum health, I think a lot of people sometimes get this a little twisted because, like, when you're they say, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about thinking positive thoughts and, demystifying the quantum by really just changing your frequency. And I think sometimes people can think that this is spiritually bypassing, which it totally can be in a way. Like, there's a time in your life through trauma when you need to be able to experience victimhood and grief and anger, but also understanding in the quantum that how this energy, if you're living in that for a long time, it can create this perpetual cycle of sickness
Hmm.
and anger in your body. And it's really important to move past that. And again, focus on the upgrading of frequency. So it's a really fine balance within, like, the trauma language, as you
Yeah.
know. It's like a lot of spiritual bypassing happens in the quantum and, like, new age movement, and that's not necessarily what I'm referring to. It's like honoring where you're at, but also holding yourself accountable so you can elevate and move on and, like, get to who you want to be and, like, the happiness and love that you want to experience. And I
Right.
often find that, when I surround myself with people, like, the most amazing people in my life are people that have gone through the craziest shit, like the craziest shit. And I'm sometimes like, you've gone through so much and you're one of the nicest people I genuinely know. And you're so full of love. And so, what is that? Like, that's their frequency. It's like I'm attracted to them, their energy, not necessarily like a sexual attraction, but like
Yeah,
their
yeah. A
energy.
magnetic
You're like
attraction.
a magnetic attraction. Exactly. You're magnetized because it's like, again, that feeling of resonance, just like they are just gleaming and glowing, and you want to be around them because that perspective and what they emit in their
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. There's a really, really beautiful quote by oh man, I can't remember his name. I don't know if I would even know how to pronounce it. His last name is spelled Gir or Gibran,
Mm.
Gibran, maybe. He's like a philosopher and poet from like I want to say at least over 100 years ago. I'm like probably butchering these facts, but like
Uh-huh.
he had this really beautiful quote where he said, "The height of your joy or your joy can only extend as deep as sorrow has carved." And it was like,
Mm.
it's one of my
Yeah,
favorite quotes. I actually have it saved on my phone. I should find the exact quote because it's really like, it's a really
I
beautiful,
love that.
it's one of my favorites because it really reminds you, it kind of is a testament to what you were just talking about, where people who
Mhm.
have really experienced a lot of difficulties in their lives, that they've had the unfortunate, but I guess, ultimately good experiences that have led them to be who they are, but they've had the experiences of, really difficult things that have caused them to
Yeah,
have to really soar, in order to feel that deep joy again. That one of the
totally.
things, one of my favorite quotes that or one of the things that Joe Dispenza says is he uses the term expansive joy. And I love
Mm.
that combination of words because I really think that like that's one of those things, one of those feelings that for me is really easy to tap into in my body as far as like what does expansive joy feel like, and like dropping
Yeah.
into your body and really like imagining what that feels like. I'm like getting chills just thinking about it,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
that particular feeling, it's so evocative to me.
Yeah.
Um and it's just like that. I feel like that expansive joy is only possible when you haven't been living your life at kind of just a baseline of neither highs nor lows. You sort of have to
Mm.
experience both. And I really think that no matter what kinds of therapies you're using, no matter what sorts of, I commented on one of your posts about this recently, actually, about how no matter what you're doing, you could be eating all the right foods, getting plenty of sunlight, even doing the frequency therapy and all the things. But if you
Yeah.
haven't dealt with that shit that you need to deal with, it's
Mhm.
it's only going to have like an 85% efficacy, all the other stuff
Totally.
that you're doing. That like you
Yeah.
have to go back and excise those old traumas and wounds and heal those things. And then once you're done with that, which, spoiler alert, you're never really done with it. You're kind of like you are retraining those neural
Mhm.
pathways in how you respond to that
Totally. Yeah.
that physical wound that's always going to exist. It's just whether or not
Mhm.
it is going to affect you all forever. You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
so I found the quote. I'm going to read it real quick because it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain.
Mm,
It's
that's so
gorgeous.
good.
One of
That
my
is
favorite quotes.
gorgeous.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's, kind of the whole trauma thing right there, I think.
Yeah, and also I want to say just really briefly, like EMDR is so amazing for anyone that is going through trauma. Like just really that modality of how it can just literally unlock things from your brain that have been hidden for years. But also, like my experience with frequency has been, like for example, if I do a scan and I like it suggests doing a liver program, and I'm like, okay. And so essentially, it's delivering frequency, bringing your liver back to balance. Well, what was putting your liver out of
Right.
balance? All that trauma comes to the surface. And so actually dealing with frequency has been pretty intense at times because like I actually had missing periods for a very long time, whether that was from veganism, trauma, eating disorders, all the things. And then running frequency on hormones and ovaries, and then dealing with what came to the surface, it was a lot. And so moving through that with grace. So I also kind of want to give like a little not warning, but just statement of like for anyone that does decide to incorporate frequency, just know that, you are literally sometimes undoing years and years and years of thought patterns and bringing
Right.
them to the surface so you can process them. And same thing with EMDR, like it can be very intense. So, you have to definitely have support and support yourself and be kind with yourself because some of these things are not easy. And also people know this with parasite cleanses too. They can be really, really intense and bring up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're not if you're not prepared for that and you're just that's like what happened with me when I had my parasite. I didn't know any of that. And when I did a cleanse in order to get rid of it, I did like a full flush. I remember being like, "What's happening?" And it was like it was a real it was an eye-opening
Yeah.
experience for sure, but I
Yeah.
didn't understand what was going on contextually until like much later.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, all the ways in which you can have things kind of like stuck in your body, and it's like I kind of imagine it as like little roadblocks all throughout your body that are just sort of like part of who you are, and doing things like frequency healing and I guess parasite cleanses and stuff too, kind of they literally like push those roadblocks out of your body. And so
Yeah.
there's like a process of like what's going on, like you feel things like rising up and come, which is like one of the reasons why they talk about finding a way to effectively like physically release that too. So like whether that's through like
Mm.
yoga or like dance therapy for example, or like just
Hmm.
moving your body, that
Yeah.
you can't have all of that emotional like and internal kind of introspection without the flip side of like releasing it from your physical space too. um and all that is it's a journey for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, so I think we've been at least an hour at this point, which is awesome. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think we covered a lot of really interesting topics that I hope people will enjoy listening to. But one last thing that I wanted to ask you about. I guess I have two more questions. One is, so what's your kind of like main takeaway for people, and how do you think looking at quantum health and frequency healing and things can help people to become more sovereign in their daily lives?
Yeah. I mean, it is a free, a free direct source that's like within walking proximity that you can take back your power immediately. And the quantum health practitioners I've worked with, they will say that like it works almost immediately. I mean, for example, when I started to wake up for the sunrise, I like had to keep my blinds open a little bit. Um, for example, like I have blue light outside of my house from the street lights and stuff. So I have these blinds that block that out. But in the beginning, I had to like kind of peep open the blinds so I can wake up with the sun, and so my room would detect, okay, there's sunlight coming in. It's morning, and so I started to do that. And now, after a few days, my body just wakes up with sunrise automatically. So I was told that your body will start to crave sunrise. Like you will wake up and know. And that's exactly what happened with me within days. And so sometimes we're used to like, oh, having to take a pill, having to wait this amount of time. But when you're working in the quantum and with frequency, things can work immediately. So for those that are like listening to this, like play with going outside and just watching the sun, and don't and be open to things happening very, very fast, because when I opened myself up to that, I experienced immediate results instead of, expecting this time frame that I've always been like creating. Our minds do that to keep us safe and conceptualize, but I was just open to miracles happening. And I said, I wake up all the time and I always say, I am open to miracles today. Like, what miracles, what amazing things can happen to me today? And I love doing that because shit happens every single time, like every
Mm.
single time. And so, yeah, I would just recommend, get outside, ground your feet, watch the sunrise, and just be open to things happening very fast and unexpected to your like your brain that can conceptualize these things, but also have like a deep sense of trust.
Start your day with saying to yourself, what is the best thing that can happen today? And how can I be the best version of myself? And end your day with gratitude. It's
Yeah,
the best way to do things. So then
yeah.
the last question that I had was kind of, what are the main things? I guess we sort of already talked about this. Going outside, watching the sunrise, grounding as often as possible, working with natural light signals, no artificial lights, things like, especially after sunset,
Yeah.
replacing artificial light sources with things like candles and red lights and things like that. So those are some of the things that people can do like today that they could start
Mhm.
doing, or tomorrow, in order to really, affect their health. So then I guess the last question, really the wrap up, is what are you working on right now that you'd like to share with your audience?
Mm. Oh, I guess I'm like in general anything that I'm working on,
Yeah, just
or
whatever it is that you're like, that you're doing right now that you want to plug.
yeah, so I'm doing a lot of online and in-person events, letting people use like my frequency device. So I work with a ton of women in this huge container, and we're all like super passionate about sovereignty, holistic health. I mean, there's just every type of person is in this container, but we're also like really passionate about like putting money back in the hands of good people, because I truly believe that for a long time I thought money was evil, and now I just view it as a really powerful tool for sovereignty. And so it's
Hmm.
really important for people to be able to make decisions where, they can make decisions out of alignment versus what they can afford. And so actually in one of the meditations we do in this container for the meetings, we'll like get together and we'll close our eyes and think about like, what if we never had to make a decision ever again based on finances, but only based out of pure alignment? And what decisions would you make differently in your life right now? And
Mm.
it really has you visualize like what is out of alignment and what you need to
Yeah.
like move the needle again. And so that has been really powerful for me. And so, you know, I'm super passionate about holistic health, and I've been for so long, and now that there's like this community that I can work in and we can spread this mission, it's really powerful. And so I'm going to be hosting like frequency events in person and online, and doing scans on people so they can have that feedback of what they need to work on, whether it's an organ or belief system. And that's with the Healy. And then also I'm going to be hosting a retreat, and I'm working out the details right now, and I'm not really quite sure where it's going to be. I'm thinking Costa Rica, but I've been wanting to
Ooh.
do retreats for, I had a retreat booked before the whole everything happened in the world. And so it was amazing. Like, super exciting in Idlewild in California in the mountains, and then all the airports shut down. So like
Oh
literally
man.
no one could come.
Oh
Like,
no.
okay.
Dang.
But it's perfect because I'm a very different person from who I was at that point.
Right.
Like that was gonna be like a raw vegan retreat. And now I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like us in mud and walking and eating beef liver and raw milk. So very different vibe.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Like complete 180. It's great. You should invite
Yeah,
those same people that signed up for the first one and be like, "Let me show you some things." You should come to
literally.
this retreat.
It's funny because a lot of them are completely ex-vegan. So
Nice. All
yeah.
right. That's awesome. I love to see that,
Yeah, me
not
too.
to rag on the vegans. I think most of them are very well-meaning. They really are
Yeah.
trying to be ethical with their decisions, but they're
Yeah.
nutrient poor. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time today. And where can people find you on social media to give you a follow?
Rewild Carly Rose on Instagram, and any of you can message me. I do my best to keep up with DMs. You can email me at rewildcarlyrose.com.
And you
Wait,
have
rewildcarlyrose@gmail.com.
and you have a newsletter too that people can sign up for, right?
Yeah, if you go to the link in my bio on Instagram, I send out a bunch of newsletter stuff. Thank you for bringing that in. I
Yeah,
totally
yeah, no
forgot.
worries.
Yeah,
It's all good.
perfect.
All right. Well, thank you again so much. I'm gonna, sign off here, and I appreciate the audience, everyone listening. This has been the second episode of In Search of Sovereignty. Thanks, y'all. Bye.